Yeah.
It's here next week. Season starts. We're in the middle of preseason. The biggest story that I want to bring to your attention right now is what's happening in Golden State. This is concerning, I would say, to say the least. Draymond Green punching Jordan Poole, stepping away from the team for a time. It looks as though he's ready to join the team for the opening tip to the start of the season. But as far as the damage done to the Warriors culture coming off of a championship, what is undoubtedly one of the greatest dynasties in basketball history, what does this do to that tarnish or that burnish around the trophy that is Golden State?
I don't know that it burnishes the trophies, but it does change them going forward. I think a lot. It feels like, at least, and tell me if you get this same sense. My sense is, hey, and Steve Kerr used the word equity a few times. Hey, we've got 4 championships that we don't win without this guy, and we're not even going to get into the 5th one. He cost them with that penalty against LeBron back in 2016, but I think that equity has been used up. Doesn't it feel like, all right, Draymond, no, just a fine, no suspension. We're bringing you back in the fold, but you're on double secret probation now, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like he doesn't get another screw up, especially a guy who is coming to the end of a contract, right? Doesn't it feel like different?
It does feel a little different. I agree with you. And I think the word equity or the word trust, you also see Kerr also use the word trust. The trust has been broken.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty interesting, because when you think about it, obviously Steph Curry is the DNA of that team, clearly. But Draymond's like a very important part of the emotional heartbeat of that team. And if the trust has been broken in that sense, I would think that's pretty concerning for this season.
I would agree. I'm curious how they bounce back. This is another case, though, where I think that they can get through adversity. I'm not sure how the Nets will handle adversity, right? You've got teams where you're just not sure. I think they can do it, but if Draymond crosses the line, it just feels like things are more fragile than they were before. They just really can't take another blow.
Yeah, and when I think about the future of Golden State, because you're right, I think we're at a pretty interesting moment here. Jordan Poole's up for a new contract, and so is Draymond Green. You think about that core that has been together for a decade plus, that won all those championships. What does the next generation look like? That, to me, is where it matters as far as the trust is broken. Because in theory, what would happen is maybe, what happened in San Antonio, where you have one stable piece, which is Tim Duncan over 20 years, right? And he teaches everybody, right? And this is what it means to be part of the San Antonio culture. And then you have Tony and Manu and Kawhi, everyone kind of follow suit. What's fascinating to me here is what we see kind of a rupture as far as, what happens going forward for the young players who will inherit the Warriors. Jordan Poole's Warriors, the Kuminga's Warriors, Wiseman's Warriors. How will they think about the culture moving forward?
I think it's a really good question. And I think, by the way, the contract subtext thing, I know everybody with the Warriors publicly and privately played that down, but I can't believe that didn't factor in. Jordan Poole, by the time we talk again next week, Corey, and do our next podcast and video, I would bet he has a new contract. I would bet that he has something close to what Tyler Hero just got at $30 million a year over 4 years. I think that's now the market for him. I would be surprised if he doesn't get that. But then where does that go? Where does that look? They've said that they can't really afford to extend Draymond and Wiggins and Poole at the prices they want and stay, even for the ridiculous amount of money the Warriors are spending, that they can't really go there. So who's the odd? There's a sense around the league that the music's going to stop and someone's not going to have a chair. It's not going to be Poole at 24.
Yeah.
But do they just if they think Wiggins is consistent this year, do they go there and say, Draymond, you're going to have to take a pay cut to stay? Or I'm curious how much this impacts that decision down the line, as opposed to, Steph Curry's still performing, but they gave Steph Curry the 5-year max, and maybe he's not the same guy at the end of that, but you don't care. You'll pay Steph Curry for past performance, and he'll still fill the building, and you'll be happy. I don't think they feel that way about Draymond.
This is where you start getting into, this is the cuts to the bone. I don't know if you ever got one time I accidentally. Well, this is stupid. One time I accidentally cut myself with a samurai sword. Don't ask me this story. I was playing Fruit Ninja.
Hey, that's a story for another day, though. I do.
For another day, different podcast. But my hand was split open, and I could see my it was like a horror film. I could actually, it was like Halloween, right? I could actually see my tendons, my muscles. It was it was disgusting, right? I'd never seen a cut that deep before. And that's kind of where what we're inching towards, as in terms of, okay, well, what do you mean to our franchise as an aging player who's a core member of our dynasty, but not named Steph Curry, And I think you're going to start seeing the reality of, like you said, either drastic pay cuts to stay a part of this team, or because you think about Andrew Wiggins, I think he's earned a very sizable contract the past 2 years. He's been unbelievably consistent and accepted that role, and has been essential to them being successful. Klay Thompson, he's definitely more in a safer position than Draymond. I think out of the three, Draymond is the most expendable. And when you start talking about Poole's contract and Wiseman, and I think once again you have a little more space with Wiseman because he's been injured and he's still young, so you can probably you're more flexible there.
I think it's a big year for him.
This is starting to get very clear which direction they're going to move it in the future, as far as to the bone. What do you bring to our franchise?
No, I agree, and I it's going to be interesting to watch them develop over the years and see who steps. This is a big year for Kuminga. I trust Moses Moody is going to be good. I'm weirdly not worried about him, but his role step up. I think it's a big year for Wiseman. I think that ultimately they want him to take over for Kevon Looney, but Kevon Looney has been rock solid for them on the court. And then, if you watched Kerr speak yesterday, he said Looney's kind of been their emotional center through this whole thing and been very mature, and he had nothing but praise for how Kevon Looney stepped up as a team leader in this situation. That's a hard thing to get rid of, and it's asking a lot of James Wiseman to suddenly step in and just supplant him.
Yeah, I think he's kind of one of those guys where you think Looney is one of those guys where you don't really understand his value until you take him out of the equation, and then you start thinking, oh wow, this is more than just stats, right? And that's kind of what I think Coach Kerr was talking about, because if you read any of these comments or you watch the team over the past few years, Looney is one of he just keeps coming up. Everyone keeps talking about how important he is to this team. And I'm looking at the stats. I watch the games. I'm like, it doesn't seem like he's, impacting the game at let's say another big guy, like a Rudy Gobert level,
Right.
But it's still, his impact, I think it's kind of like 2 + 2 = 10. So that's a very interesting point, Kurt. One thing I want to talk about just briefly before we move on is the juxtaposition of what we're seeing with Draymond and what we're seeing in college football and in the NFL. Davante Adams shoved somebody after Monday Night Football recently, and he got charged with a misdemeanor assault for a violent shove. The guy fell down, right? I don't know if you've seen that video.
I have seen that video. Yeah, it was kind of hard to miss. Yeah.
And then you saw recently Tennessee's safety, Jalen McCullough, was arrested on a felony charge where he punched somebody. This is reportedly, he assaulted a man at an apartment complex, punched him, fell down, and he was bleeding, right? The guy fell down a flight of stairs and was bleeding. And it's a felony assault charge. So if you've watched the video of, Draymond punching Jordan Poole, it's definitely more violent than Davante Adams' shove. And it looks as though, it's like right up there with what McCullough did with this guy. This is why I think the leak for the TMZ video was so why the Warriors wanted to investigate it so thoroughly, and why they were so passionate about trying to keep it quiet, because that video, that footage, that borders on criminal, which is this is not just like a scuffle in practice. I think that's one of the reasons why immediately he stepped away. And so that the juxtaposition of those two instances really paint this into a different light for me, Kurt.
Yeah. As a former police beat reporter, I would say that one key difference is that the guy pushed by Adams filed charges. Obviously, Poole did not. In fact, he was out shooting free throws after still shooting when the media came in after that event and didn't know. So he didn't press it, and I think that's part of it. I think, by the way, the other thing, and I'd be curious to get your opinion on this, is that the other reason I think the team really reacted to that video, on top of the potential criminal stuff, is that they felt their space was violated, right? Hey, the practice is ours. The media is not in there. There's, this is our space, our time. And to have that go public, they felt like something private of theirs was pushed out into the light when it shouldn't have been. And I'm curious because obviously you've been at a lot of high level practices. That's a space. Football's a little different because I think there tends to be media around. There tends to be just more people around than the kind of closed gym practices you get in the NBA. But is that a private space for them? Do they feel that they've been robbed of that kind of space?
Yeah, I mean, people are very, touchy around practice and, trade secrets and all that stuff, generally speaking. But you also think, you, especially in this environment where you're a professional athlete, everything you do is under a magnifying glass and scrutinized. That you would hope that there is one kind of like sacred place where you can just go and work on, just work. Like this is your job. So just go to practice and do your job. And so I do understand that in the sense of what you're saying, as far as like it's a private space, a sacred space for people. But like I said, at the end of the day, for me, I don't think there's any sort of place for that kind of violence.
No.
And that's whether it be in a sacred place or not. Like to me, that is not okay whatsoever. And so that's kind of where I fall on the issue.
No, I think he absolutely crossed the line. That was a violent punch intended to hurt. That wasn't the, hey, we're bumping chests, we're pushing, waiting for guys to separate us, so we're not really fight. That was intentional. And I think one of the things you heard was a lot of the Warriors, if you watch the video, I mean, they're practicing. Curry's got his back turned to this whole thing because they're running sets on the court. I don't think a lot of the team realized how violent the act was until they saw the video. And I think that changed the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah. And the last thing I would like to say about this is I think we forget about what the NBA used to be. I don't know if you remember, the NBA in the 80s and 90s where it seems like we're getting in fights. You look at those highlights, it's like everyone just throwing punches like that on the court, like during an NBA game. Yeah. And I think David Stern worked really hard to get that out of the NBA.
Yeah.
So we saw a little bit of like a reversion to what the NBA used to be with Malice in the Palace. Do you remember that? I mean, that was So
that was not the only one where fans were involved, sadly. So
but like that kind of violence in the NBA, David Stern, I think, worked really hard to reframe the NBA from guys from inner city neighborhoods who may be categorized or typecast as thugs, to being respectable businessmen who are they own media companies, they're winning Oscars and Emmys, like they're sports personalities and pop culture personalities. So I think that anything around that kind of any reversion to what the NBA used to be, I think is a big no-no. Just because of that history that all of us have, like deep in our bones, we remember what it used to be, and I don't think any of us want to go back to that.
No, that's a really good point.